Mr. President, I thank the distinguished ranking member on the Budget Committee for engaging this discussion, and anxious to hear from our colleague from New Hampshire, Senator Ayotte. But she was there this morning and was able to ask questions of the witness, the panelists that we had in front of the Budget Committee. And I guess what struck me about listening to that discussion was just the evasiveness that we got from Mr. Zients. And in fact, as the Senator from Alabama has mentioned, failure to respond to just very direct questions, and not questions that are trick questions, questions that are a matter of the facts. And I think what I was struck by, too, is when he was asked about whether or not the administration wanted Majority Leader Reid to bring the President's budget to the floor, he couldn't give a direct answer, and his comments indicated that they would not be calling on the Majority Leader to bring the President's budget before the Senate. And the other thing that, too, I was struck by is that the President's own budget chief could not verify that the President had added already about $5 trillion to the debt since taking office. Those were both things that just seem like very straightforward questions and should have been very straightforward answers. But the fact of the matter is, it's very difficult, I think, for him or any other official in this administration to defend this budget. And this budget is not a serious budget. And even people on the other side, people in the media, have all passed judgment on this and basically said that this is not the kind of budget that takes on the challenges that the country faces. And I would say to my colleagues that it's hard to take this seriously when they aren't serious about it, but they ought to be, because these are serious times. We live in a time where we're running already a $15 trillion debt. This budget would add $11 trillion to that debt over the next 10 years. We are living at a time when we've got European countries who are on the collapse or on the verge of fiscal collapse with regard to their economic and fiscal situations, much of which we are watching on a daily basis unfold in front of us, and what that might mean for our country. And hopefully there is something instructive about that, because clearly to me, we need to be taking a page out of what's happening there and getting our house in order now. We have made promises to the American people that we can't keep. We need to reform our entitlement programs. And that, probably more than anything else, to me, was the biggest disappointment in the President's budget, because it's the fourth year in a row now where he's proposed a budget which doesn't do anything to address the fundamental drivers of federal spending. And by that, I mean the mandatory part of the budget. That's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, all those different programs represent today, with interest on the debt, about 64% of all federal spending. At the end of the 10-year period, they would represent 78% of all federal spending. And so what this budget is a dramatic increase in the amount that we are spending on these various programs. That is what is driving federal spending today. That is what will drive federal spending into the future. And that's why a failure and a lack of leadership when it comes to the issue of entitlement reform is so disturbing. And it really is a missed opportunity. Now, I understand this is an election year. Everybody says this is a campaign document, this is a political document. That does not absolve the President or us of the responsibility that we have, the American people, to start making some decisions around here that will get this country back on the right fiscal track. And so when you propose a budget that spends literally $47 trillion over the next 10 years is basically what we're talking about here. Now, you haven't done much to bend the spending curve in the right direction. So I would strongly disagree with Mr. Zients' statement today that this is a, quote, very tight budget, I think is how he described it. We do have governors around the country who are making some tough decisions to balance their state's budget. The federal government ought to do the same. South Dakota is a good example of that. We made some very difficult decisions this last year, and as a consequence of that, our budget situation is much better this year, but it was because they had the courage to step forward and do some things that needed to be done. The budget's been proposed by the President fails to rein in the government spending and to balance the budget. As I said, it adds to $11 trillion to the national debt, which would reach, if you can believe this, nearly $26 trillion by the end of the decade under the proposal that the President put forward. And so I can go on, but I would say to my colleague from Alabama and to my colleague from New Hampshire that based upon what we heard this morning, I have no more, I don't feel very reassured, I guess, that this administration gets it. And the President's budget submission clearly was an example that, that they don't get it, and the defense of it this morning that we heard in front of the Budget Committee certainly reinforced that impression with me. You know, it was interesting to me because at the White House Fiscal Responsibility Summit in February of 2009, and this is when in the context of discussing our unsustainable budget deficits, President Obama said the following, and I quote, "Contrary to the prevailing wisdom in Washington these past few years, we cannot simply spend as we please and defer the consequences to the next budget, the next administration, or the next generation," end quote. Well, that's exactly what he's been doing now for 4 years. Literally, every budget, every year, we think, okay, maybe this year the President is going to get serious because we've got a serious problem in this country. These are serious times in which we are living, and we've got to get the situation turned around or we are headed for certain disaster. And yet last year, as was noted, the President's budget, when it was put on the floor of the United States Senate, did not garner a single vote here. Not a single vote. It was 97-0. It was unanimously rejected by the United States Senate, members on both sides voting against it. Well, this year, you would think, okay, the situation is that much worse. Our fiscal situation has deteriorated even more. The amount of debt that we've racked up is continuing to accumulate. And we thought perhaps this year we would see a budget that actually did address these problems. And of course, no. We got another budget that is filled with more spending, more debt, and higher taxes at a time, literally, when we need to be tackling spending, we need to be taking on saving Social Security and Medicaid or Medicare for the next generation, and doing something to create economic growth in this country and get jobs created for American workers in this country. And what's really disappointing about it is not just the fact that the spending and debt situation is out of control, but also the impact that has on the economy. The senator from Alabama knows full well because we've both have studied this subject. And if you look at the research that's been done with regard to the impact of spending and debt on economic growth and job creation, there is a clear correlation there. When you achieve a certain level or arrive at a certain level of debt as a percentage of your entire economy, 90% is the threshold. It costs you about a percentage point of economic growth every year, which means fewer jobs, in this case about 1 million fewer jobs in our economy. So the high sustained levels, chronic high levels of debt and spending are directly impacting our economy's ability to get out of this cycle that we're in and to start growing and expanding again and creating jobs. I think it's very clear, and I think if you look at the, as you said, debt as a percentage of GDP, now over 100%. I mean, think about that. This is the highest level of debt, highest level of spending as a percentage of our GDP that we've seen literally since the end of World War II. We have not seen anything that rivals it. We've seen now 4 years in a row where we've run trillion-dollar-plus deficits, and we've added, as was said earlier, nearly $5 trillion to the debt since this president took office. But when you get that kind of debt level sustained over time, it does have a direct impact on jobs in the economy, and I believe that we're paying a price for that right now. And you can look at what's happening, obviously, with the high levels of debt and the impact that it's having on countries in Europe. And so, you know, this whole idea with the president reducing his budget, not taking that issue on, not doing anything substantial or meaningful with regard to spending or debt, and then adding to it, making matters even worse, raising taxes by almost $2 trillion. You know, it seems like the most natural instinct, it's just in their DNA, everything has to be about raising taxes. And clearly that's not the solution. We all know that. In fact, we need to create policies that will be conducive to economic growth and job creation in this country. And raising taxes on investment, which is what the budget does. And by the way, it would raise capital gains tax rates from 15% to 20% right away. And then if you're hit by the Buffett rule, it would go up to 30%. It would raise the dividend tax rates from 15% up to over 39%, almost triple the tax on dividends in this country, which incidentally have already been taxed at the corporate, at the business level. And so you're talking about almost tripling the tax rate that we're going to pay, the Americans are going to have to pay on investment income in this country. And then you look at the Obamacare taxes that would kick in, the 3.8% on investment income. You add that and you start getting to a marginal income tax rate in this country that's up in the 43, 44% range. It is very hard to argue that can be anything but awful when it comes to jobs in this country. And so the entire budget from the failure to address spending and debt, the failure to take on saving Social Security and Medicare by reforming our entitlement programs, and the seems like constant reliance upon taxes as their answer to everything. This could not be a worse budget for the American people. It couldn't be a worse budget for the economy. It couldn't be a worse budget for jobs. And it certainly couldn't be a worse budget for seniors in this country as we continue to watch Medicare and Social Security cascade further and further toward bankruptcy. So it's a bust as far as I'm concerned. I think that's why people on both sides and people in the media and the American people get it. It's time for this administration to get serious because these are serious times. And when you're going to do big things, you need presidential leadership. There are 100 senators, 435 members of Congress, 535 of us in all. There's only one president, one person who can sign a bill into law, one person who can engage the American public and the Congress in a way that will help us solve these big problems and tackle the challenges that we face as a nation right now. This budget does none of that.